Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Mentor podcast. I'm pumped to have Patrick with us today. Welcome, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jake. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to discuss a little bit about my Bitcoin journey.
Awesome. No, and so am I. I take the same approach with everyone, Patrick, which for those people that have listened along before should be fairly familiar now. But for those that haven't, we're going to spend the next hour or so getting to know Patrick, getting to know his background, his areas of expertise, and how he came across Bitcoin and why it's important to him. To do that, we will start back at the beginning. So Patrick, perhaps you could introduce to me where you grew up and some of your early interests in life, and anything that comes to mind that you think is important to share is totally cool. I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Sure. So, Jake, I grew up in Glendale, California, which is kind of a suburb of Los Angeles. I'm a city kid. I'm a big city kid. I grew up about 15 minutes from downtown LA and just kind of been around that whole entertainment, capital of the world, Hollywood. When I was younger, I very much had an interest in movies and entertainment. And, just like a lot of kids, I was in a lot of piano classes, dancing classes, acting classes, things like that. Early on, I just knew that I wasn't going to go into entertainment. It was just kind of something where I was like, it's a long shot. And a lot of these people, they're just doing jobs as waiters and stuff and trying to make it big. So I've met a lot of people who have actually moved to California to try to make it in the entertainment industry. And I think, for some of them, I think California is a great place to live. But once they show up here and they don't make it big in Hollywood, they seem to want to go back to wherever it is they moved from, which I kind of understand. I was more interested, actually, when I was younger, I did want to become a pilot. When I was in high school, I took some flying lessons and I was very much interested in flying and aviation. Probably one of my first early interests was aviation. Now, I decided at some point that I didn't want to become a pilot. I mean, it sounds glamorous, but you are flying and there's a lot that can go wrong.
Of course,
So
yeah.
so I decided pretty early on that I was like, I don't think I want to go into flying, but so I did have an interest from a very young age in the stock market and Wall Street. I saw the movie Wall Street when I was like 10 years old. I asked my mom and dad for a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. So
Cool.
I guess the kind of the outside way that I somehow got interested into Bitcoin was my interest in finance and stocks and Wall Street and things like that. So that's I think kind of the in that I got into, where I kind of started to look more closely at something like Bitcoin when it somehow first came across my radar.
Oh, as is always the case, Patrick, when these conversations start, I've got tons of questions from all the things you brought up. First of all, so life in and around LA, what's it like in that you touched on it? There's not only people who grew up locally that are heavily influenced by the entertainment industry because of where you are, but also there's all these people that come with huge aspirations to be part of it. When you say you were into movies, like was there a specific genre? And what was it that put you off the industry?
I guess I kind of came of age once movies like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction were coming up, and movies like Goodfellas and things like that. Late 80s, early 90s movies that I remember watching, and I was fascinated by movies. I kind of became a little bit of a movie buff where I kind of tried to learn a lot about movie trivia. So yeah, it was. In fact, Quentin Tarantino was one of those people who moved to California to try to make it in the entertainment industry. And in fact, I believe his mother, Quentin Tarantino's mother, lived not too far from where I grew up. I think he was kind of in the same neighborhood. As far as what it was specifically that kind of turned me off of movies, I hate to admit it, but I do think it was politics. I wouldn't say that I have the same politics now that I did when I was in high school, because in high school I was more of a traditional conservative. I was more of a Republican. And I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio, which is kind of weird for a high schooler to be listening to Rush Limbaugh. But I was very much interested in politics. And I kind of saw a lot of Hollywood as just being just these psycho leftists. And this is kind of part of my journey with Bitcoin, even though I grew up more of a traditional conservative or a Republican. I that did kind of change as I discovered Bitcoin and I kind of discovered the philosophy around Bitcoin. I kind of cringe at myself when I think about how I was back when I was a high schooler and how I thought It was so important that, the president was having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. And I thought that that was such a crucial issue back then. I kind of cringe looking back on it because I think it was just kind of silly on my part. Obviously, I'm still interested in politics and geopolitics, but I don't really get into this whole our guy has to win the election anymore. And that's kind of very much mellowed with me. Once I discovered Bitcoin, I discovered what kind of a sideshow this whole political landscape is.
And so, like, what's a psycho leftist? That's a phrase you use there, which I'd love to kind of examine more. And I'm the same, right? When I think back to 20 years ago when I was a teenager, the life experiences you've had radically shape who you become. And okay, so the Lewinsky affair was obviously a huge part of politics at that time, and inevitably it shapes how you view the world. What I always find interesting is thinking about, well, why do I know what I know? Like, who wanted me to know that? And the political leaning that you tend to have means you consume information from certain sources. And as we know, Bitcoin gets you to really dig right down into like, what's the incentive here? So what's a psycho leftist?
Well, for me, I never had an issue with people in the entertainment industry having political leanings. I thought that that was fine. I think everyone has political leanings, and it was fine. What bothered me was the sense of superiority some of these people had in that they were trying to kind of really actively campaign and try to kind of force us to listen to their political message. People like Harvey Weinstein, who now is very disgraced, but at the time he was thought of as someone very important in Hollywood, and he was a very important political figure who donated to leftist politicians. And even though I liked Harvey Weinstein's movies, I thought him very repulsive. And even somebody like Larry David, who is, for the most part, Larry David is harmless. As far as I know, there's no big scandals other than when he was promoting FTX, but there really haven't been any scandals with Larry David. But Larry David was just had this sense of moral superiority and was like pushing climate change and how, you're an awful person if you drive a car that has less than 20 miles per gallon. And maybe to some extent, Larry David was right, not in the sense that you shouldn't drive a car that has gasoline in it, but perhaps in the sense that if you're driving some big giant car that's kind of a hazard to the other people on the roadway and is kind of making it dangerous for bicyclists and things like that, and you can't even see over it, I can understand that. But that really wasn't where Larry David was going. He was more of one of these climate change cultists, kind of a religious thing. And that's the part that I didn't like. It wasn't so much that someone had political opinions that were different than mine. I was okay with that. It was this moral superiority and just trying to make everyone that just didn't agree with them to be some really awful person. I guess that's what it was.
I've stepped foot on US soil under 30 days of my entire life, and I'm like 36. But the US will be the most influential kind of cultural part of my life. And I think that's probably very much reflected for everyone in the world, frankly, especially English speakers. That the power that Hollywood wields is extraordinary. Over your time living in and around it, then, have you noticed that kind of those political leanings of influential characters that are dominating that industry? It must come through in their movie making. And so is it weaponized, to use a word? And how do you see that? I mean, as a local to the industry, it's like, okay, whoa, like this is actually, I don't know, just teach me about that.
I I think that really good movies aren't preachy, and it doesn't really matter whether you're agreeing with the message or you're disagreeing with the message. I can watch a movie where I agree with the overall message of the movie, but I can kind of see it as it's being too preachy. But I think all the great movies, even though they may have been made by people I disagree with politically, I think that they kind of don't have a political message that they're kind of hammering you over the head with it. There might be some subtle hints here and there. Like, for example, I just heard somebody say that Forrest Gump is a conservative movie. And I watched Forrest Gump as a conservative, and I thought it was a good movie. I didn't think it was a conservative movie or a leftist movie. I just thought it was a movie that kind of touched on all these important cultural things that happened throughout the 1960s and 70s in America. But I don't think that any great movie is a political movie. I mean, there have been political movies, but nobody really likes them. If a movie is overly political, Even people who agree with the politics of the movie tend to not like it. I think that that's a good sign because at the end of it, Hollywood is a business. They are trying to make money. So what they're trying to do is they're just trying to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. But then at the same time, you can have a movie like The Matrix, which has a political message, but it's not something that you cringe at. It's just kind of something where anyone can kind of attach to it. Anyone can relate to it. Where it's like, oh, you're being controlled and you're being fed propaganda and whatever your political leanings are. You can watch a movie like The Matrix and kind of be like, yeah, it is kind of like that. I do feel like we're all being brainwashed into this one little cubicle and to do what everyone else what everyone else is doing. I never stopped loving movies. I just don't watch movies anymore just because I don't have the time to. But I'll occasionally block out a 4 hour space to watch a movie like Dune, when it comes out, like it or hate it, But I just don't keep up with the Hollywood news anymore.
It's inevitable that one gets heavily influenced by what's popular in your local area. Of course it is. But what's interesting is then, okay, well, you realize this wasn't for you. And so you touched on potentially wanting to fly. Then you touched on, watching Wall Street and, okay, I want to learn about this thing, the stock market. So where did your intuition take you, and what was the next few steps?
Yeah, I didn't really understand how, keep in mind, I was 10 years old. Wall Street came out when I was like 7, and I watched a movie when I was like 10 years old. So I watched it a few years after the movie came out, and I didn't really understand. I'm like, I don't get it. So they're buying these things which don't exist, and then they're getting rich with them. Obviously, at 10 years old, I didn't understand the overall message of the movie. But I was like, there's something here. There's got to be something to this because most people, they have to go and work really, really hard to make a living. But these guys are able to do it by buying and selling these things that don't exist. So that part of it intrigued me, but I still didn't understand. I thought there must be some sort of a scam there because I didn't understand exactly how it is that you can buy something and then 3 months later it triples in price and you can sell it and make a profit. I still didn't understand that back then. In a sense, Wall Street is a scam. We're told we have to invest our money in these big corporations in order to save for our retirement, and we all accept it as normal. In fact, there's a line in Wall Street, which I didn't pick up when I first watched it, but as I've rewatched it a few times, I kind of picked up. There's a line in there about Nixon taking us off the gold standard, off of the Bretton Woods system, which was one of the reasons that the stockbrokers in the movie were like, yeah, everyone now has to buy stocks because you can't really save for retirement like you could. Everyone, no matter what your job is, whether you're an engineer or a heart surgeon or an attorney, no matter what it is that you do for a living, you have to have a second job, and that second job is being an investor. Rather than investor should be a very specialized field of people who really know what they're doing, who really know how to evaluate companies and try to figure out what's going on. Because if you're just telling everyone they have to become investors, the likelihood that someone who's not an expert on investing will be scammed is very, very high. When I was 10 years old, it was more of I didn't understand it. And then I was like, well, if there's a way to get rich doing this stuff, I want to learn about it. So this is why I asked my parents to get a subscription to Wall Street Journal for me. So, at a very young age, I was reading the Wall Street Journal and I was trying to come up with methods to try to forecast which stocks would do better the next day. And I was kind of, I wasn't even using a computer. I was just basically using a pen and paper and like writing down what the biggest gainers were each day and then trying to look at what the biggest losers were each day and try to use that to predict what will be the biggest gainers and losers the next day. And what I found out, it wasn't really very helpful. What I found out after I did this for like a week, what I figured out was that the stocks that were the biggest gainers of one day were the biggest losers the next day and vice versa. So basically I was just taking the 10 best stocks and the 10 worst stocks for the day. They were just kind of basically going back and forth. So there was really no way to make money off of it. It was just that, these are like, I didn't know what volatility meant back then. I was like, these are the stocks that are the most volatile. So, and obviously there's really no hard way to be able to forecast which stocks are going to go up just by looking at numbers like that, just by looking at, with apologies to my friend Tone Vase, who does that for a living. But I don't think a lot of people can do what he does, and I think he's got a way of doing his stuff which he minimizes his risk, and it's not something that's for public consumption, in my opinion.
Yeah, investing's very, very hard. How interesting that you picked up on that in that movie. So when would Wall Street have been first released? Like late 80s?
Yeah, 85 I believe is when it first
Okay,
came out.
so the
I
mid
didn't see it
80s.
until the late 80s, like 88 or so is when I first saw it, I believe.
And it's so funny, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people, they realize central banking is a problem, but like, what are you going to do about it? And it's not
Mm.
until this thing that we love called Bitcoin rocked up that was like a viable alternative that it's really started to shine a light on the disbenefits of the central banking funded system. Before I want to go too much down a rabbit hole of that and why the use case for Bitcoin exists, I love these influences that we all have as younger kids, and it's where our like inspiration comes from in many ways. But Patrick, teach us, what did you go on to kind of study at a higher level, and what did you get into for your professional career?
Sure. Well, when I first got to college, was still thinking that I wanted to become a pilot. I was thinking, well, let me study engineering. So I took one engineering class. It was Engineering 101. And I very quickly discovered that I did not want to be an engineer. Um, it was like, this isn't really for me. This is not what I grew up interested in. This is not what I wanted to do. So a lot of people who become really good engineers, they grew up as kids wanting to take things apart and try to figure out how, something works. And I don't think I necessarily was that type of a kid. I kind of liked science. I was interested in science, and but I wasn't really the type of person to actually want to, take something apart and see how it worked. So I kind of switched to finance as my major. I kind of got interested in economics. My interest in economics was, even though maybe finance is a more, I guess it's a more interesting field than economics, because it's all about trying to, watch your money grow. The thing about economics that interested me is, even though I was never a gold bug, a lot of people who go into Bitcoin, they start out as gold bugs. I was never a gold bug in the sense of I wanted to buy gold as an investment. I was never the type of person to be like, oh, let me buy the gold ETF, or let me buy some gold bars or silver bars. I was never that person. I never thought that gold was a good investment. However, in the sense that I did like gold, is I liked gold because I thought that the government should be on a gold standard. And my reasoning for why the government should operate on a gold standard is because it actually limits their capability of spending. It limits their power, basically. So if you're a believer in small government, as I am, the way that you actually can get a small government is to have limited resources. And if the government is operating on a gold standard, it limits their resources. And one of the reasons why every country, including the US, went off of the gold standard is because they didn't want to be limited by these constraints. The reason why Nixon went off the gold standard is because the US was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and there was all these 1960s social programs, the social welfare programs of the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. And there's no way that the U.S. government could pay for all these brand new social welfare programs, and at the same time fund this really, really expensive war in Vietnam, and remain on the gold standard at the same time. So that's why the gold standard ended, because the government didn't want to be constrained by it. So interestingly enough, I was a fan of being on the gold standard without necessarily thinking that gold was a good investment, because I thought, in my mind, they were separate. They were two different things. And I think for a lot of Bitcoiners, that there isn't necessarily that distinction. And then, interestingly enough, one of the reasons why I liked the gold standard, in my interest in economics, was, if you're an economist, or if you're an economic buff, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, you know the name Alan Greenspan. So Alan Greenspan was the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the Clinton administration, and I think he went into the George W. Bush administration. I don't remember when he was appointed. I don't know if he was appointed by Clinton or by a previous administration, but he was this guy who got credit for the booming economy in the 1990s. And Alan Greenspan, was Mr. Fed. He's the Federal Reserve guy. He believes in, money printing. He believes in controlling the economy through the Federal Reserve. But he actually wrote an essay, and it's not. You can find this essay. I think you can still find this essay online. It's not a very long essay. It's about 2 or 3 pages long. He wrote an essay when he was a young economist, young economic scholar, talking about how important the gold standard is. And his argument in favor of the gold standard was that it actually constrained the power of the federal government. That's what influenced me, believe it or not. One of the reasons why I was attracted to Bitcoin was Alan Greenspan, and what he said when he was Anakin Skywalker before he turned to the dark side and became the chairman of the Federal Reserve. He actually made a very good point for the gold standard, although I'm sure he swore it off when he had the opportunity to become the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Wow. I didn't know that story about Greenspan. Yeah, we'll have to try and dig that up and pop it in the show
Yeah,
notes.
shouldn't be
Um,
too hard to find.
and so in this case, then, so the gold standard was a format for operating an economy that you came across as a philosophy as a student, because it's quite uncommon that in itself. I went through business school myself, and it's so heavily Keynesian oriented that it's all about how you can control inflation with interest rates and how the government spending programs are what stimulate the economy. In hindsight, me and all of the guys that I went through that business degree with, we all came out with the same philosophy of business, which was a central bank funded economy. So it's actually quite uncommon that you came across that document and that you had that philosophy, which is really cool to hear. And there's other people in the Bitcoin space that were sound money advocates and Austrian economists before that. But even for myself, I didn't hear about Austrian economics really until I started getting into Bitcoin.
Same
Um,
here. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So you studied finance and economics. Did you go on to work in finance and economics after that? Like, where did your career take you into your 20s?
So I actually worked as a loan officer, and I worked in sales. And this was right before the housing crash. And of course, Los Angeles and California were right at the tip of that. So it was right before this big crash that I was working in this. And I was making pretty good money as a mortgage loan officer. And you don't really need a finance or economics degree to do that job. You just have to be you have to be competent with numbers, and you have to be good at talking to people, and kind of have good sales skills. So I kind of see my profession as being sales more than it is finance or economics, at least originally. And then, like, after the crash of the housing bubble back in 2008, I was like, you know what? I like numbers. I like looking for edges. I'm good at analysis and things like that. So I decided that I wanted to do something simple. I didn't want to be working in something where it was all about getting the biggest sales bonus possible. So I decided to go work as basically a proposition player at a casino. And if you don't know what a proposition player is, then I don't blame you, because nobody knows what it is. It's basically a job that only exists in California card clubs, which are called casinos, but they're not really casinos, where you're basically sitting at the table, at the gaming table, and you are acting as the bank for the game. So I have, like, say, $10,000 worth of chips in front of me, and the players, let's say they're playing blackjack or pai gow poker, it doesn't matter. They're playing some game, and if the players win, I give the money to the dealer, and the dealer pays the players out. And if the players lose, the dealer collects the money and hands to me. It sounds like a simple job, but it's actually, I took that job very seriously. And my biggest fear always was, when I was banking one of those games, was that the dealer or the players would try to run some sort of a scam on me, and that I would notice it. So what I did is I actually tried to make sure that they wouldn't even try anything. Like, if they wanted to run a scam at one of the tables at the casino, I wanted them to be like, "Oh, Patrick's on that table, so let's not try that on that table, because he's over there. So let's go try it on this other table where the guy who's doing the job is sleeping half the time and he doesn't even see what's going on." So I wanted to be that guy where, if they suspected somebody was possibly cheating, is they sent me to that game. And a lot of times they're like, "Hey, Patrick, something's weird is going on at this game. Sit down, see if they're doing anything wrong." And a lot of times I would sit down at the table thinking that, oh my God, they're running some scam. And then I would, like, looking for the scam. And then finally I was like, oh, it's not a scam. They're just getting lucky and winning. So when you're told ahead of time that there's something off, a lot of times your brain, you kind of automatically think that there must be something wrong. But then, like, I
Yeah.
try to kind of take a step back and say, wait, are they doing something wrong? No. But a lot of times I did notice people doing something wrong. The thing that upset me the most was when I caught them doing something wrong, and I caught them cheating or something, or capping a bet or something. And I immediately went to one of the supervisors and I told them, I was like, "Hey, this is what happened. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 99% sure. Check the camera." And most of the time they would check the camera and they would come back and they would fix the issue. But then some of these supervisors that I was talking to, they were very apathetic and they just didn't want to be bothered. And it really upset me whenever I went to one of these guys and they said, "Well, it's probably fine. Don't worry about it." And then eventually those supervisors, eventually they stopped working there. They got replaced. And then they promoted me to be one of those supervisors, because I was one of the ones that was always, catching these mistakes. And I was the one that was being trusted, banking the games where they had hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake. So I just decided that I just wanted to do something simple. I didn't want to do anything complicated, and I just wanted to earn my paycheck and go home. And that's what I did. And I was working there at this casino, which is when I first heard someone talking about Bitcoin to me at that time. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And brilliant. Let's segue into that. Take us back to like roughly when that was. So you're working the casino, Bitcoin gets mentioned. What was it that interested you? Perhaps you ignored it to begin with. And I'm always fascinated by like how many touch points we all need to like really take this thing seriously.
Here's what happened. So there was something in America called Black Friday, and this was in, I think it was April of 2011. So this is very early. I mean, April 2011, no one's heard of Bitcoin. It's kind of
No.
this,
Yeah.
yeah. So at that time, while I was working at the casino, on my off time, I was sitting in front of a computer and playing poker online. Now, I'm not a very good poker player, so I can't really make money playing poker online unless I was able to find my niche. So I was actually playing a game called Raz, which is a very obscure game that most people don't know. So I was playing Raz online, and I got pretty good at Raz, where I was actually making a profit playing Raz online. And the reason why I was able to make money playing Raz online is because it was a game that most other people didn't know. So
Mm,
to me, the best gambler is not someone who's the best at a game, but who plays against weaker competition. So a lot of times, what would happen is people would sit down in a tournament and they would think that they were playing Hold'em, which is what everyone wanted to play back then. But then they found out it was a Raz game. They had no idea what they were doing. So what happened is that the government in April of 2011, the U.S. government shut down all the U.S. poker sites. So this was Poker Stars, Full Tilt Poker. And so I was really upset because I was making a little bit of a side income playing poker online in addition to working in a casino. So when I was really upset about it. So I was like, well, what am I going to do now to make some extra money online? So I came to work and I was a little upset, and I talked to people. I was like, yeah, they shut down the poker sites. Now I can't make money playing Raz. What am I going to do to make money online? So, and I'm not really much of a gamer, like a video game type of person. But then I was thinking in my head, there's something called World of Warcraft, and I heard it's possible to make money playing World of Warcraft farming gold. So I was kind of bouncing this idea off of people, and they said, yeah, there's sweatshops in China where people sit in front of computers all day just playing World of Warcraft, and they're farming gold, and they're selling the gold for dollars to Americans. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't sound like what I should be doing. And then someone else said, there's something online where people are using their computer's processing power, their CPU power, to generate virtual currency. This is what the guy was telling me. And I'm like, okay, but so they're using their computer's processing power to generate virtual currency. I'm like, are they making a profit with this? He's like, well, not really, because it's not really worth very much, this virtual currency they're generating with their CPUs. I'm like, wait a minute, why would you need to use your CPU to generate virtual currency? Couldn't they just copy? Couldn't they just make more of it? He's like, no, it's actually set so that there's only a limited amount. I'm like, but it's not worth anything. It's like, no, not really. I'm like, so people are spending their electricity and their computer's processing power to generate this currency that isn't really worth anything. Why? And he said, well, because they think it's going to be worth more in the future. And I was like, okay, I'll tell you what, if it's worth more in the future, then I'll get interested in it. But as far as I'm concerned, that sounds like a scam right now. And that sounds stupid. Now, I don't remember if the guy actually said the words Bitcoin or not, but someone mentioned this to me, and actually for a while I forgot who it was. I didn't remember which one of my coworkers it was that told me this. And then I think later on, by process of elimination, I did remember who it was who told me this. But I've actually reached out to that person. I've emailed them, and I found them on Twitter, and I sent them a message on Twitter. But they've kind of gone dark, so I don't know if they've gotten super rich off of Bitcoin and then kind of gone dark, or what's going on with them. So if you're out there and you know who you are, I've been trying to get a hold of
yeah,
you.
come say hi
So
to Patrick.
yeah, but then I kind of forgot about it and I just kind of tuned it out. And it wasn't until 2013 when I really got into Bitcoin. So this is like a year and a half or 2 years later is when I actually rediscovered Bitcoin. And I can go into like kind of how that was, what actually
Yeah,
led, because
please
that I
do.
think that
Yeah.
that first conversation, that was like the first touching point. So in 2013, I was still working at the casino. At that point, I had been promoted to supervisor, and what was going on in the world was I had kind of gotten very disillusioned with politics because we had just come fresh off the 2012 election where it was Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama, and I voted for Mitt Romney because in my mind I thought Mitt Romney would have been a good president. That's how dumb I was before I discovered Bitcoin. I voted for Mitt Romney. He lost. I was pretty upset. So I had kind of like, politics, you're not going to solve anything with politics. This is what I kind of was telling myself. It's a waste of time. And I'd seen this YouTube video where they were talking about Bitcoin. And it was, in my mind, it was the first time I had ever heard of Bitcoin. I'd never heard of it before then. So even though I had that conversation in 2011, I didn't even remember it at this point. And basically, they said that it's being mined and it's got a limited amount, and most of it has already been mined. And it's kind of like gold because there's a limited amount and it's getting harder and harder to mine. So all that stuff made sense to me as someone who believes in the gold standard. And then the video ended with this line which said, yeah, but you can't turn a Bitcoin into a watch. That was what the video ended in. So when I heard that, I was like, okay, whatever. So I was like, okay, so it's not really gold because you can't use it for anything else. Now, at the time, I was riding a motorcycle to and from work at the casino. And I don't remember when it was, whether it was a week after I saw that video or could have been a day after, but I was coming home from work in the morning because I'd worked all night at the casino. And in the morning, I was going through LA rush hour traffic, and the traffic was worse than usual that day. Just 2 minutes from home, I got into a really bad motorcycle crash.
Wow.
And I woke up on the pavement, not remembering how I got there. So I was kind of like, I kind of had this short-term memory loss and a concussion. Sorry, Jake, what were you saying?
No, I just said, fuck, sorry. Intense.
Yeah. It was a really bad crash because I was in the hospital for like a week, and I went to the trauma center, the local trauma center, which was in Pasadena, California. They have a really good trauma center there. So I thought, when I woke up on the pavement, I thought they were going to take me to the nearest hospital, which was in Glendale, California. But they told me they were taking me to Huntington. I realized when they said Huntington, in my mind, I was like, oh, it's a trauma center. That's how bad so my right arm was crushed. And I don't know if you could see it on the camera, but I still have my scar from where my elbow was basically destroyed and my shoulder was destroyed.
Wow.
And my left thumb was broken in 3 places. So basically, I went to the hospital, and that night when I was in the hospital, that first night, the crash came back to me. I remembered the crash. My family came to visit me in the hospital, and I told my mom, I told her, hey, can you go inside? Because my phone was crushed and I couldn't call work to let them know that so I'm like, I have to email work to let them know that I'm not going to be able to be there. So I told my mom, can you go into my apartment and find my iPad and bring me my iPad so I can email work and let them know that I'm here? So my mom went and brought me the iPad, and I was able to use my iPad to email work and let them know. But what I did is, on that iPad, I tried to figure out, I tried to watch that video again. I was like, hold on a second. I just saw this video about Bitcoin, and I was like, let me see if I can find that video. So I went on YouTube on that iPad trying to find that same Bitcoin video that I had just watched, maybe a day before, maybe a week before the crash. I'm not sure exactly when. Suddenly, I don't know what it was, but something in my brain got scrambled, where before the crash, I thought Bitcoin was an interesting idea, but it's not going to work. But then as I woke up from this concussion in my brain, I'm thinking, I got to find out more about this Bitcoin thing.
Wow.
So I couldn't find that video. And I found out why later that I couldn't find that video. The reason why I couldn't find the video is because I remembered it wrong. There's this famous YouTuber called the Green Brothers. They're 2 famous YouTubers. And I thought it was one of those 2 brothers that was making the video. I found that video later, and I discovered that it was someone else. But I found a lot of other YouTube videos talking about Bitcoin, especially ones by Amir Taki and Jeffrey Tucker. These guys were early Bitcoiners and very well respected in the Bitcoin space, although maybe not so much anymore. But back then they were talking about Bitcoin, and I started watching these videos, and I was like, yeah, this makes total sense, because around that time, this was March of 2013 is when I had my crash. And March of 2013, that's around the time that the Cyprus banking crisis was going on. So I was thinking, well, even if you save all your money in cash, where are you going to put it? The government could still say, well, we screwed up, so we got to come and take your money anyway. And that 2013 Cyprus bank bail-in crisis was one of the reasons why, after my crash at least, I was like, you know what, Bitcoin is important and I better get into this. So I was never really, at least I wasn't back then, a computer hardware expert, but I kind of became a computer hardware expert when I got out of the hospital. I decided that I wanted to start mining Bitcoin. In my mind, yeah, that's the best way to get it, to mine some. And I had this HP computer that I had bought from Best Buy, like off the shelf, and it was a couple years old. The specs weren't really good enough to mine Bitcoin with it, but I discovered, well, you can upgrade it. And you're not really supposed to upgrade these computers. They're not really designed to be upgraded because, you buy them in the store and they just come as is. But if you want to, you could still do it. So I bought a GPU, a really nice tricked out GPU. I was able to install it, but the GPU won't work because the power supply is not good enough. So I had to get an upgrade the power supply, and the CPU was a single core CPU. And I bought a quad core CPU, and I learned how to put it on, and I upgraded the RAM. And had done none of this stuff before. People were thinking I was some sort of a computer expert. I wasn't. I just basically what I did was, in my mind, it was pretty simple. But I did all this stuff, and I started mining Bitcoin with it with a GPU. And that's how I got a hold of my first Bitcoin, is just mining with this GPU, which was very inefficient and not worth it. By that time, it was already too late because ASICs had already started to come out. So eventually, what I decided to do is, there was this pool where you can mine script coins. So this includes Litecoin and Dogecoin and other, a dozen other coins that have similar mining algorithms. And what you would do is you would mine these other coins in the background without knowing which one you were mining, because the pool would automatically switch in the background between mining different coins, different script coins. And what they would do is they would sell those coins and send you Bitcoin. So I was getting Bitcoin by mining with my GPU, but I wasn't actually mining Bitcoin. I switched to this other, I forgot what the pool was called. I don't even know if it still exists, but you would just basically just mine some altcoin, and then it would get Bitcoin as a result.
Wow, Patrick, what a journey! I'm loving it. It is crazy when, I mean, that's mad, really. Like, this completely out of the blue motorbike accident
Yeah.
transformed your thinking without,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like almost subconscious, isn't it? You just woke up and you were just plugged in differently. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
I've got to
that was
learn more about this.
so. Not only did I start liking Bitcoin, but it also changed my political philosophy, because I was like, in the hospital, I was like, yeah, maybe I'm not a Republican anymore either. And
Okay.
that kind of made me more open to the libertarian philosophy, which before I was suspicious of, but now it just made so much more sense
Wow.
after that crash. So I'd love to say that my journey to Austrian economics and libertarianism was a study of logic, but it really was just getting my head knocked straight.
And it doesn't, I mean, the truth is, it doesn't really matter how you ended up at that conclusion ultimately. But what's so interesting is everyone's journey is unique. Like, I've not spoken to one person that has the same things that happen to them that made them go, oh, I need to, look closer at Bitcoin, or I need to understand what it means to be libertarian, and what kind of future might those things paint as a combination. Also, just shout out to my friend Danny Brewster, who founded a business called Fast Bitcoins in the UK. He's based in the Isle of Man. It's an old school Bitcoiner who was over in Cyprus building a Bitcoin business at the time of that bail-in. And he told me an amazing story as to how it all worked. And for anyone who's not familiar, it's just a classic example of a monetary system that's controlled by a small handful of people that were able to basically tax the population of a country and say, by the way, any balance you have in any of these banks that's above a certain threshold, we're going to take. And it's just crazy, right? Just another one of the things you go, well, that doesn't make sense. Where's my money gone? Obviously, now we know there is another option, which is Bitcoin. Patrick, given this is a podcast about Bitcoin Mentor, I want to talk about the business itself. Before we get there, you mentioned about becoming a hardware expert. And I think that's probably where your real passion lies. So maybe we'll spend a bit of time understanding what that means to you and some of the kind of main skills that you picked up to give yourself that description. And what I love is that we can teach ourselves anything, which is, I'm pretty sure, what you're about to tell me.
Absolutely. YouTube is where I discovered, or rediscovered, I should say, Bitcoin. I just basically went and saw, you know, people on not just on YouTube but online just explaining how to do it, and there was all these philosophies, and one of the things that I remember them saying about when you upgrade the CPU, because you have to put this cooling gel on it, and they said you can put the gel on the actual chip, or you can put it on the mount that you're going to place it on, but not both. Somehow if you put it on both, it just doesn't work right. You have to put it on one or the other. And there was a split. But yeah, you can absolutely teach yourself anything. Obviously, I couldn't understand everything all at once, but slowly I've just decided to be a student of Bitcoin and try to learn more and more and try to learn a little bit about how the cryptography behind the scenes works. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that stuff, but it's just stuff that I've just kind of become interested in. Like I remember around the time that I got into Bitcoin, there was this video on YouTube that was showing someone mining Bitcoin by hand, and basically they were doing it. Obviously, they're doing it like something like half a hash every 10 minutes or so. So obviously, you're not going to be able to actually make money doing it by hand. But I was fascinated by this. I was like, well, how does SHA-256 actually work? I've just been curious about it. And there's websites you can go to where you type in something. You can type in your name, or you can type in anything else, and a random string of digits come out. And if you just change one letter, or you add an extra space, it completely changes the string of letters in hexadecimal that come out. And just out of curiosity, I was like, let me see how hard it is to try to randomly come up with a really low hash, where I would just type different letters over and over again on a SHA-256 converter, and it would say eventually if I would get two leading zeros. That was so hard just to get two leading zeros, So that just kind of goes to show how difficult it is to guess the correct hash range to be able to mine Bitcoin. But yeah, and I remember Ben Sessions. I found a lot of his videos later on, and I watched his videos because I was trying to learn more about multisig, because I understood a little bit about how the signatures work in Bitcoin. I was trying to figure out, well, okay, what if I want to set up a 2 of 3 multisig? How do you do it? And there really weren't any good resources back then. I found Ben's channel and I subscribed to it right away, Ben BTC Sessions. And I remember one of the first of his videos I saw there was a video where it was describing how to set up multisig using several different hardware wallets. And of course, we've come a long way since then. And now it's a lot more, that process has become a lot more optimized, where it's a lot more easier to pick it up, where there's a lot fewer steps that you have to do, and there's a lot less ways that you can screw up. So I'm very, very happy about how this has progressed, how Bitcoin has progressed to the point where now almost anybody, even with very little technical skill, can just set up a multisig, set up an inheritance plan. And it's all due to pioneers like Ben Sessions and others like him, who have tried to take these complicated things and simplify them. And I was really happy to see that. And I would love to be a part of that, because that's kind of what I've been doing also. Because with my friend group, I was known as the Bitcoin guy. I have friends who I told about Bitcoin years ago, and they finally went onto Coinbase and they bought some Bitcoin. But now they're too scared to withdraw that coin off of Coinbase because they don't know what they're doing. They bought a hardware wallet, but it's still sealed inside the box. They're too scared to even open the hardware wallet. So a lot of times we take it for granted that we think it's pretty simple to just withdraw coins off an exchange. We say, oh, get your coins off an exchange, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. But to someone who's never done a Bitcoin transaction, that's very daunting. It's almost like if you grew up as a little kid with a swimming pool and you learned how to swim at a very young age. When you're an adult and you hear someone say they can't swim, sometimes it's hard for you to believe that it's possible for someone else not to be able to know how to swim. But it's like we can teach people to become self-sovereign. It's not as complicated as it sounds. Even when I was teaching myself how to turn my HP computer into a Bitcoin miner, I didn't think it was even that complicated. Even as I talked to other people who had computers, they're like, "Oh, you upgraded your computer. Can you upgrade mine?" Like people were asking me to go to their house and upgrade their computer for them. And I'm like, why would you pay me to upgrade your computer? It's super easy. I could just tell you what to do. It's not that, you don't need to have some super hardcore, Steve Wozniak to come in and upgrade your computer. Anybody can do it. And I think that that's my passion when it comes to Bitcoin Mentor, is that I think that we can teach people to become self-sovereign. And eventually, when we tell people how to set up a multisig and they learn how to do it, then they're feeling confident, and then they want to do more, and they want to do something a little bit more complicated, and they're going to come out to us, and then they're going to teach their friends how to use Bitcoin. And I think that that's a very, very important mission about just making Bitcoin easy to use, because to me, that is one of the things that's holding back adoption, because a lot of us are thinking Bitcoin would already be up to $1 million by now. These things take time. They take long because it takes a while for the public conscious to catch up to, this is your money, this is your sovereignty, this is a bearer asset. You have the power to take control of your money. But with that power comes responsibility, which is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. And that responsibility is you also have to be responsible for keeping your coins safe. And I think that we can help people do that. We can kind of, handhold a little bit and get them there to the point where they're feeling confident. We can unravel this mystery of Bitcoin so that anybody can do it.
It brings to mind the last episode I did was with Nathan. Shout out to Nathan. And he talked about one word at the very end that totally resonates, which is confidence. So wherever someone might be on their journey to what you describe as self-sovereignty, it doesn't really matter necessarily. It's just, what is the next step? And how do I know I'm doing this right? And if I fuck it up, what does that mean to my money? And you and I have been doing this for a while now. And if someone was to employ you as their mentor, you get to leverage all of Patrick's years of experience to get to where he's at today. But it's also your intuition has taken you naturally to a point where you find it really straightforward to upgrade a computer. Other people don't work like that. And so by being able to employ you to help them, that's a great trade. And that is, in many ways, the definition of specialization of labor and why economics is actually so crucial. Because it makes more sense, right? We're all naturally better at some things than others. Okay, well, Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. And as we try and wrap this up, I want to just hover on that phrase of self-sovereignty. What does self-sovereignty mean to you?
Self-sovereignty is taking what's rightfully yours, taking the power that's rightfully yours. We all think of ourselves as being free human beings, and we're free to do whatever we want as long as we don't violate anyone else's freedom. And to me, that's what self-sovereignty is. It's the natural order of things. It's what you would tell a little child that it would be okay to do. Don't take things that aren't yours without permission, and don't hit people. And I think everyone would agree to that. And if everyone just abides by those basic principles, we can live in a self-sovereign way. And if someone isn't following that, then what they're doing is they're aggressing on your liberties. And that's what self-sovereignty is. It's basically you have the power to do what it is you want to do, the pursuit of happiness, so to speak. It was originally in the U.S. Declaration of Independence. It was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And the reason why they changed it from the pursuit of property to the pursuit of happiness is because they didn't want, because a lot of times the word property, especially back then, was associated with slavery. So they didn't want to have anything that could have been construed as being promoting slavery in the Declaration of Independence. So they changed it from the pursuit of property to the pursuit of happiness. And to me, that's what self-sovereignty is. It's your life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And like I said before, with that liberty, with that freedom, comes responsibility. So if you do something wrong, you're responsible for that. If you violate someone else's rights, you're responsible for that. So to me, self-sovereignty isn't you can do whatever you want. It's you could do whatever you want, and you're responsible for the consequences of what it is that you do. So that's where it comes from, where we tell people that you have the power to control your own finances, but you also have the responsibility to do it in a way that you don't lose your funds and you don't put yourself out there to be the victim of a crime. It's what got me into Bitcoin, the Cyprus bail-in that we were discussing earlier. Now, what's interesting about the Cyprus bail-in, Jake, and you kind of touched on it, is that it hasn't really happened since then. I remember that at the time that it was happening, people were saying that this is going to be a regular thing. Going forward, we're going to have these types of crises happen all the time. And for the most part, it hasn't happened since then. And ask yourself why that is. I have a theory. I think I know why it hasn't happened since then. Not to say it will never, ever happen again, because I think it eventually will. But the fact that this is not a regular thing that is happening every year or every other year, I think it's because Bitcoin exists. And people saw how that bank bail-in crisis, which is an attack on self-sovereignty, how that promoted Bitcoin back then in 2013. And if it happens again, I mean, is anyone going to trust their money with the bank again? We like to criticize, what happened with Canada, with how the Canadian banks were cracking down on people who were trying to help out the protesters, the trucker protests. Yeah, absolutely, the truckers convoy. And one of the reasons why they stopped doing that was because people were pulling their money out of the Canadian banks. And it wasn't just the people who were supporting the truckers' protests. It was people who had nothing to do, who didn't even like the truckers' protest because they didn't want them. They knew that someday they're going to do something. They're going to donate to some cause which is going to anger the government, and then they're going to be the victims. So people who were in no way associated with the truckers' protest or supporters of the truckers' protest, they didn't want that happening, and they started pulling their funds out. And this is why they eventually stopped. And that's what self-sovereignty is. The fact that you can save your money and you don't have to invest in the stock market, and you can save your money in cash or Bitcoin, basically, in hard money, and not have to worry about some central authority either bailing in your money or closing your account for donating to the wrong cause. That's what self-sovereignty is. Long-winded answer, but
No,
that's
it's
what
a
came.
brilliant answer, and you touch on so many things. I want to kind of cycle back to that image of a child. Basically, this is what I, was teaching my daughter just yesterday. I'm totally okay for you to share your emotions. You can say how you feel, but you are not allowed to hit me. That's not allowed. There will be repercussions for that. And it's like self-sovereignty is actually a mindset and an approach to life and a philosophy in a sense. And the money that you use as part of that mindset is up to you. But if you're not using Bitcoin, then your philosophy of self-sovereignty has been compromised. And you're in the banking system that's controlled by other people. And therefore, a bail-in might suddenly appear, or your bank account could be frozen if you give your money to the wrong thing. And then we can go down that whole rabbit hole of what does a central bank digital currency actually look like? And, it's just a hyper, it's just I don't know. How would you even describe the potential? It's like a hell, right? Having someone literally being able to program your money, saying you can't buy this, you can buy that, you can't buy this, you can't buy that. Just absolute madness. And hopefully we never get there. Well, Patrick, what a journey. Thank you so much for sharing all of that today. I've learned a ton, and it's always awesome to hear the different routes people took to get to where they are today. So thank you for sharing. If someone wants to reach out and get involved with you as their consultant, how do they get in touch with you?
I'm usually known as Bitcoin Motorist online, but you can find me on bitcoinmentor.io. Just click on the mentors and you can see me, and you can request a session to become the expert among your friends so that then you could be teaching them, or you can refer them to me if you don't want to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Patrick, so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.